This must be one of the most famous images in recent time. Those brand new notes.
Stacks of banknotes. Now let's get the show on the road. End of January, 31st of January, which is Tuesday, is the deadline for us to change all our, I don't even know what to call them, old currency notes and replace them with the redesigned currency notes. And the CBN has said that there's no going back on that date, even though they have had appeals from several quarters to extend so that people can continue to exchange their monies. But the CBN says no going back. As from the 1st of February, that currency stops being legal tender. Mr. Mefiele has urged those who might still be holding to those old notes to turn them in, assuring that they would not be harassed as they did so. And the Apex Bank also said that they're printing more banknotes to boost the availability. Of course, there have been complaints from many quarters that the banks are not readily, that the notes are not readily available. Some banks don't even have, and we have seen tweets from bankers saying even they, who are in the banks, don't see this currency.
Not don't have. Don't see. It's okay.
And many ATMs are empty. The few that are dispensing have long queues, and yet Tuesday is the deadline. We have an economist with us who might have some words of advice for us as to what we can do. Should we be stuck with monies by the end of work on Tuesday, 31st of January?
Just before you introduce him, let's just put out the word that we made frantic efforts to get the CBN to come talk to us specifically from the Currency Operations Department of the CBN to also weigh in on this so that you, Nigerians, will know exactly what the status is and how serious the problems are. But unfortunately, I guess that will have to be at a future date.
Well, they did agree to come, but they're overwhelmed by their advocacy work, prior to
All they have to do
Tuesday.
is release the cash. Come on. What's the overwhelming thing? How's that overwhelming? Release the money out there.
Nigeria is big.
Oh, really? So that wasn't factored into the plan? That Nigeria is big?
Well, they've been doing it, but they haven't finished. They haven't concluded yet. Mr. Calvin Emmanuel is an economist, and he joins us from our studio in Abuja. Good morning, Mr. Emmanuel. How are you today?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So Tuesday is just around the corner. It's just 2 working days from today. And, some banks do open today, so you can still turn in your currency today. So the money is not available in the bank. It's not available in the ATMs. So what would you advise us to do? And the CBN is saying no extension. Tuesday is Tuesday, January 31st, full stop.
Well, I've been very consistent in my criticism of Mr. Mefiele and his team, the management team, deputy governors, directors, and the board of the central bank. I'm very consistent right from when this policy was announced, I think on the 26th of October, 2022. I think it's ill-timed, it's a smokescreen. There is nothing wrong with redesigning the Naira notes, doing the currency swap, old notes, new notes, in the CBN Act. The problem is, number one, the timing, and number two, the window, the 90-day window, is completely unrealistic to swap 2.7 trillion banknotes. But I'll give you a little bit of perspective and context so you understand how the CBN is thinking. You have to go back to ways and means and the fact that the cash supply to the economy through ways and means went up from 869 billion naira where President Buhari took over in 2015 to 24.5 trillion naira today, in violation of Section 38 of the CBN Act. Now, when CBN Act was amended in 2007 and Ways and Means was created by the Senate, between 2007 and 2015, that window went from 0 naira to 869 billion. There's so much cash supply in the economy that has caused exchange rate driven inflation and currency devaluation the CBN is attempting to withdraw cash back from the system and limits the amount of cash that goes back in circulation. The only problem with that is that today as we speak, 55% of the population is unbanked, today as we speak. And
55%.
you have about 38% internet penetration rate. You have 42,000 base stations in Nigeria. There are states in the northeast, there are states in the northwest, local governments, the entire local governments that are cut off from telephone and internet signals. I remember last year when Governor El-Rufai asked the telecom companies in Kaduna to suspend the network to help them fight terrorists. You know, how do you want people to do their transaction if you have states, for example, in Yobe that has less than 500 base stations? How do you want them to do their transactions through digital and cashless banking? Look, cashless banking, right? Financial inclusion is not something you can force. It's not something you can compel. It's something you have to incentivize through your open banking framework. This is the reason why I believe, and I've been very consistent in this, that this is a smokescreen, and the real motive for this stricture, telling people that by Wednesday morning, every old note they have will be outlawed, considering that you have 63 million BVNs and 133 million bank accounts, and an average of 30.8 bank accounts per individual when you look at it on a weighted average basis. And more than half of your population are unbanked. I think the governor is going to end up moving that date because he doesn't have a choice, because this has national security implications. But the government really needs to ask itself, what is the real motive of the central bank wanting to compress this timeline into 90 days when, for example, in the UK, they have a 24-month window within which they're exchanging 50 and 100-pound notes that has the photo of Queen Elizabeth, late Queen Elizabeth, and bringing in King Charles into the system. 24-month window from March 2022 to March 2024. What is the rush?
Mr. Emmanuel, you said 55% of Nigerians are unbanked. This cashless policy has been on for at least 10 years. You mean that's the best that we could do in 10 years? We couldn't go beyond 55%?
Well, you have to understand that bringing people into payments, transactions, credit, insurance is not just left to the Central Bank of Nigeria. It actually needs infrastructure from government MDAs. For example, I talked about the fact that there are 42,000 base transceiver stations in Nigeria, and Lagos has the highest number of BTS in Nigeria, at 15% of it, about 6,000 BTS. Now, if a state or a local government does not have access to telephone and internet signals, how do you bring them into the banking system? How do you bring them into digital and electronic banking? You can't. So there is a case for the Nigerian Communications Commission and the Ministry of ICT to increase the number of BTS. Now, late last year, the Nigerian Governors Forum said that it was reducing the right-of-way charges per kilometer from 145 naira to 14.5 naira per kilometer, which is a good development because it incentivizes companies who are in broadband infrastructure to be able to, build fiber optic technology to more states across Nigeria. So there needs to be an harmonization of effort from the Ministry of ICT, the NC, Nigerian Communications Commission, the NITDA, and the other critical stakeholders in the private sector to ensure that the number of base transceiver stations in Nigeria, what is popularly called telephone masts, goes up from 42,000 and it goes up to somewhere around 100 or 120,000. Because if you don't have internet and telephone signals, you can't bring people easily into digital and electronic banking. And that is like a disincentive for also PTSP, POS terminals usage that helps people to be able to do cash transactions. If you don't have access to the infrastructure, there isn't much the CBN can do. So it's not just the exclusive preserve in terms of responsibility of the CBN to integrate people through the open banking framework into the financial system. It's also the work of the other MDAs and the critical stakeholders in the sector.
Well, Mr. Emmanuel, a number of things play in my head right now about the same issue. I think as at when the CBN was making that announcement about the redesigned, redesigned Naira notes, he was specific in saying that as at the end of September 2022, available data at the CBN at the time indicated that 2.73 trillion naira out of the 3.23 trillion naira currency in circulation was outside the vaults of commercial banks across the country. And he further said later on that as at December 8 or thereabout, as at December 8, the central bank had taken in more than $1 trillion naira, and the banks also have about $1 trillion naira mopped up. So it presupposes that maybe about, we can say something in the wing of 2 trillion naira has been mopped up in terms of cash liquidity in circulation. Do you see the attempt by the CBN or the concern that informed this whole process? Do you see it as something significant, of significant concern?
But I think they have a strategic direction with this policy. The implementation, however, is flawed.
No, we'll talk about the
governor says that 1.5 trillion.
Just one second. We'll talk about the implementation, Mr. Emmanuel. Just one second. We'll talk about the implementation, but let's speak to the meat of the matter, the whole idea of it. Do you think it is of significant concern that Nigerians should actually partner with the CBN in addressing it?
It's important to partner with the CBN to address it. But the question you have to ask, the meat of the issue here you have to ask is, what is the ratio of the unbanked to the banked? Is there infrastructure for the unbanked to come into the banking system? That's the meat of the matter. That's the question you have to ask. If you're asking them to bring their cash back into the banking system and saying that there has to be more cash in the banks than they are outside of the banks, how do they do their transactions? There are markets in the southeast, there are markets in the northeast, there are markets in the northwest, where they do 600, 800, 1 billion naira in cash transactions daily. Now, these people normally will want to do banking transactions. But the question is, if you go to a market that is close to a forest, do you have telephone or internet signal to be able to do a bank transfer or mobile money transaction? That's the question you have to ask. These are realities in Nigeria. You know, it's very easy for us to pontificate from urban centers, from Abuja, from Lagos, from Port Harcourt, from Ibadan. But the question is, when you go to Borno, Yobe, you go to Adamawa, you go to Taraba, at the infrastructure we enjoy in the urban areas and semi-urban areas, are they available in those areas? And the rural population in Nigeria is more than the urban population. That's the reality of the matter. The data doesn't lie. Data released by Nigerian Communications Commission shows that the internet penetration rate is somewhere around 38 to 40%. That's the reality of the matter. How do you bring people into the system? Yes, bring their cash into the system by compelling them within a 90-day window and telling them that they can't withdraw it because the banks are saying that they are receiving only about a tenth of the monies that were returned to the vaults of the CBN.
Perhaps that's a fresh concern, Mr. Emmanuel.
They can't withdraw their money back when there is no infrastructure for them to
just
use
one second.
electronic and digital channels.
Perhaps that's another, that raises the fresh concern of timing. And you already said you guess that, you know, within in a matter of time, the CBN might be compelled to extend the time. Whether or not you see that happening, I think is another thing we want to look at, because if, for instance, the CBN says, look, we had 2.7 trillion naira out of that, you know, milling around out of in circulation out of the bank vaults, and now we are getting closer and closer to what exactly we want to achieve. Do you see a chance where the CBN would not take the risk in saying that date stands and whatever is out of circulation, we consider it a loss to the nation, and perhaps some kind of sacrifice that the Nigerians whose monies or cash are still out of circulation have to make for nation building?
I think that is going to be like a very, it's a weird thing to hear, but in a country like Nigeria, nothing is impossible. I'll tell you what. The CBN governor insisting on January 31 is a national security risk. It's something that goes beyond the Central Bank of Nigeria. It goes as far as the National Security Council, you know, at the presidency. I don't think that's a risk that they are willing to take. At the end of the day, this coming week, he has to announce an extension to people bringing in their monies into the banking system. He doesn't have a choice. Because you saying that you're going to outlaw old Naira notes is going to cause a pandemonium around Nigeria. How do you compensate the people whose notes are outlawed and they can't use anymore?
Mr. Emmanuel.
It's going to cause a pandemonium. Say it's a national security risk.
Mr. Emmanuel, the CBN governor spoke 2 days ago and said he had bad news for those who were asking for an extension, that there would be no extension.
He said it, yes. But then he's going to have to put up with the presidency on the intelligence gathering they've had, on the implication of him insisting that by February 1, he's going to outlaw any currency that's not in circulation, given that the window for this currency swap is too short. There's going to be a crisis. I don't think he's ready for that.
Even when the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria himself said there is no going back.
Well, there's no going back. He said that, but we still have about 3 days to the deadline. On the day of the deadline, I'm expecting an announcement that there's going to be an extension of that date.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Emmanuel. In the middle of all this, about 2 days ago or so, the CBN also launched a, should I call it a domestic card scheme called Afrigo. How does that fit into all this that we're talking about?
It doesn't fit, and I'll tell you why it doesn't fit. It's a simple commercial play. Let me give you a background. Afrigo Payments Limited is a subsidiary of Nigerian Interbank Settling System, NIBSS, that's in charge of clearing of checks, general interbank recurring order, GRO for bulk payments, automated debit transactions and automated credit transactions, all the instant switch of payments when you transfer from one bank to the other or same bank, or you pay bills. That's NIBPS. So they are basically like coming out with their subsidiary company, Afrigo, to set up a domestic card scheme that's in line with what has been done with in China, in Russia, in India, and in Turkey. Okay, to compete with international payment companies, because I think that the government realizes that having your payment data infrastructure in the hands of international companies like Visa, MasterCard, UnionPay is a national security risk. Okay, so they are coming with that to compete with these companies to provide a local alternative to this card. So it doesn't fit into this argument about Naira design and financial inclusion. It doesn't fit.
Okay. Okay.
But I'll tell you what. You notice that with the countries that I called, China, Russia, India, and Turkey, except for Turkey, China, Russia, and India are part of the BRICS. Post Russia and Ukraine, China, Russia, and India's relationship has become closer. They've even gone away from the SWIFT system of bank settlement payments for international transactions to the SPFS, right? Because Russia was, booted out of the SWIFT network because of what it did in Ukraine. Okay, these countries are not comfortable with having Western companies hold their financial data infrastructure for debit and credit card payments. So I think Nigeria is trying to toe that line. But the question I always like to ask is, on your list of priorities, what are the most important things to tackle? The most important thing to tackle today in our economy is inflation. Why is the governor of the central bank running around in circles focusing on the things that are not the most important things to tackle for the well-being of Nigerians? That's the question I have.
Well, what do you think could inform or could have informed the decision to have a very short window? Because, I mean, I look back in time. I look back at times when Nigeria has changed currency or, you know, redesigned currency, if you know, you want to put it that way. It's the first time I remember that there is this much pressure of people trying to get the new notes. It's the first time I'm coming to it. As a matter of fact, I remember when the biggest denomination at the time was coming out, the 20 naira note. It was with excitement that people waited for it because there was a lot of announcement about it. The images were sent out. People, you know, expected to handle the new notes in their hands. Back in the, I think even in the 70s into the 80s and all of that. So, and we've had similar occasions down through the years. This is the first time we're having this kind of pressure. There are those who have alluded to the possibility of politics into all of this melee. What, in your opinion, could have informed such a short window for the CBN to mop up trillions of naira? And as at now, 3 days or thereabouts to the expiration of the deadline, there are still tens, if not hundreds of billions of naira still in circulation.
There's an economic reason I can think of, and there's a political reason I can think of. The economic side is ways and means. There's so much cash in circulation. This was a merciless play to, you know, bring a backdoor for reducing the amount of cash in circulation and see how that can bring down the level of inflation that we currently have at 21.34%. You know, which I think is ineffective because even as at the last week of December, the Senate approved a supplementary budget of 1 trillion naira. And they've approved for the federal government to go back to that window to borrow another 819 billion naira from the federal government, from the CBN. There's a political side to the argument, and the side was, oh, it's going to restrict terrorist financing, it's going to restrict vote buying. Question I have for the government is, number one, let's go back to the extant laws. Vote buying is contained in sections 84 to 93 of the 2022 Electoral Act. It's not the purview of the governor of the central bank to fight vote buying. Terrorist financing is contained in the act that establishes the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit of 2018 on generating suspicious transaction reports. It's not in the purview of the Central Bank of Nigeria. It's not their work. So for me, it actually has like ulterior motives and Nigerians are not aware of. They're just bringing up the official reasons because you compelling people to exchange trillions of notes in such a short period of time definitely has an ulterior motive in play. But I think that this policy is definitely targeted at some political actors on the political side, and then on the economic side, it's trying to use one bird to kill two stones. But at the end of the day, however good intention this policy is, I honestly believe that Nigerians are the ones who have to pay the collateral damage for whatever fights that are ongoing and for whatever chess moves that they are playing.
Unfortunately, the central bank couldn't join us this morning to answer some of those questions. We'd just like to thank you, Mr. Kelvin Emmanuel, who joined us from Abuja. Mr. Emmanuel is an economist. Thank you very much for coming to share your insights.
Thank you.
With us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sunrise will return in just a moment with another interesting conversation. Do stay with us.